on the anniversary of 9/11. Mrs. Bush Jr., I'm going to come back to Mrs. Bush Sr. later on. And Mrs. Blair, they gave a radio broadcast, synchronized, swimming in the grief of the anniversary of 9/11. They invited us in their joint broadcast never to forget those heartbreaking messages of love and farewell left by those poor American women on those airplanes on 9/11 from their mobile telephones, messages left on the answering machines of their loved ones. They asked us never to forget those messages, as if we could. But as I said at the time, just because Afghan women don't have mobile telephones and their loved ones don't have answering machines, it doesn't make their deaths delivered from the sky any less obscene than the deaths of those women on those aircraft in the United States on 9/11. The blood of some people is more valuable than the blood of others. Nobody can deny that. There are no minute silences for the dead women in Afghanistan. There are no fundraising concerts to look after the families of those whose breadwinners were killed in the bombardment of Afghanistan. They don't even know how many died in Afghanistan, let alone what their names were. There are no plaques with all their names on it to commemorate them. Very few people even gave them a second thought. They were just collateral damage in the bombardment by the richest, most powerful upon the poorest and most ragged. Now, most people in the West are oblivious to the fact that this double standard about the value of different people's blood exists. But let me tell you, there are no Muslims in the world who are oblivious to it. Every Muslim in the world knows that an American life is worth more than an Afghan life. A British life is worth more than an Iraqi life. An Israeli life is worth more than a Palestinian life. They all know that. And it's because they know that so many of them are boiling with rage, a subject to which I shall return again and again. The first thing we have to do, and this is the most important message I have for the United States of America. If you listen to nothing else I say, listen to this. The first reason, the flaw at the heart of the West's policy towards the East, the policy towards the Muslim world of countries like America and Britain, the flaw at the heart of that policy is the more than 50 years of injustice that has been visited upon the Palestinian people, paid for by American money and made possible by American political support. Every bullet in the back of a child in the Gaza Strip was paid for here by the United States taxpayer. Every rocket that's ever fired into a refugee camp is fired from an Apache helicopter given to General Sharon by the government of the United States of America and paid for by you. You may not know that. Maybe your people don't know that. There's not a single Muslim in the world who doesn't know that every crime committed by General Sharon is paid for by the United States of America. And when the Security Council convenes to condemn it, you can be sure it will be vetoed by the United States of America. Your people might not have noticed it. Every Muslim in the world has it engraved on their heart as the most grotesque injustice and unfairness and unbalanced policy anywhere in the world, followed by any government, is the unending, bottomless support your government gives to every crime committed by Sharon's Israel. But no country in the world has broken more United Nations Security Council resolutions than Israel. No country in the world has occupied other people's territory by force for longer than Israel. And we know, thanks to the brave Jew Mordechai Vanunu, that Israel sits on top of a mountain of weapons of mass destruction, including hundreds of nuclear weapons targeted at all the Arab capitals with the missile capability to deliver them and destroy any and all Arab capitals in an afternoon. So Iraq gets broken for these three reasons. Israel gets rewarded for these three reasons. Last week was the 23rd anniversary of the massacre of Sabra and Shatila refugee camps in Beirut. I remember them well. I used to live in them. That's not an anniversary that was much observed here in America. Not much observed in Britain. Most people, maybe even some in this hall, don't even know what I'm talking about, Sabra and Shatila massacre. But every Muslim in the world remembers the Sabra and Shatila massacre. Let me tell you or remind you what happened there. In 1982, the Palestinian fighters left Beirut on board ships under international guarantee that their families left in the refugee camps would be protected. That international guarantee was signed by the ambassador of the United States of America, and no sooner had the ships sailed out of harbor than these refugees, old men, women and children only, no young men left, were fallen upon like wolves. The Israeli forces and their Lebanese fascist allies poured like wolves into the refugee camps and massacred thousands of Palestinian refugees, defenseless, without arms, without men to protect them. And who was in charge? Who was in charge of that massacre? Who was literally standing at the gate of the camp? I mean literally. He's pictured standing at the gate of the camp while the massacre was going on. You're right, General Ariel Sharon. The same Ariel Sharon that Mr. Bush tells us is a man of peace. I mean, even Sharon doesn't consider himself to be a man of peace. But George Bush thinks he's a man of peace. And when Sharon turned up in New York last week for the UN, we were expected to treat him like a statesman with a red carpet. He wasn't treated like Hugo Chavez with his security men denied visas, coming to a country where the president's friend has just threatened to murder him. No. Sharon was brought here and we were asked to be grateful that he finally, 40 years late, evacuated a few settlements in a small part of the occupied territories. Even though the settlers who were moved from Gaza each got, tell them this in Boeing, every one of those settlers was given $250,000 compensation for leaving stolen land that they should never have been on. Who paid that money? You did. Your government paid that $250,000 to every one of those settlers who illegally occupied other people's land for nearly 40 years against international law. 7,000 settlers occupying 1/3 of the Gaza Strip, leaving 2/3 for the other 1.5 million Palestinian refugees living in indescribable conditions. 7,000 settlers using nearly 40% of the water of the Gaza Strip that 1.5 million Palestinians had to share the balance of the water resources. And we were asked to feel grateful that Sharon finally moved those 7,000 settlers out, even though he still controls the water, the air, the borders, and can re-enter the Gaza Strip at any minute.